Oh,
all right. Wonderful. So wonderful to have so many people here tonight. My name is Emily Norton. I'm the Executive Director of Charles River Watershed Association, and we are thrilled to be offering this presentation tonight. And we have over 60 RSVPs, so we'll see how many people are able to come. But we'll jump right into it. There's really no excuse in the Zoom era for starting late, right? Unless you tripped on your way upstairs or something. So the title of tonight's program is The Dam Removal Movement, Why Watertown Dam Should Be Next. So there should be no ambiguity about what CRWA's angle is here tonight. And we've all been through this for almost 2 years now, but just to remind you of our Zoom meeting norms, to please use the chat box for questions. And please hold questions until the end of the presentation. We have 3 main speakers. And if you do have any technical issues, please use the chat box or email Dira Johanna at the email that is on the screen. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it was a little bit ahead of the presentation, ahead of the slides. So we can go to the next one, Robert. So in terms of our agenda tonight, we are going to start with Beth Lambert, who's the director of the Massachusetts Division of Ecological Restoration. And they have been, that agency has been responsible for overseeing numerous dam removal projects. So she can speak with some authority over that and that experience in the rest of the state and what we can expect here. Then we'll turn it over to Ben Gahagan from Mass Division of Marine Fisheries to speak in more detail about the impact on the fish population of the Charles River and this dam and what removal would do for that. And then Robert Kearns, who's a climate resilience specialist at Charles River Watershed Association. And then we will hopefully have I'm sure we will have a lot of questions and that hopefully we will be able to address. And then we will try to have it all wrapped up by 8:30. And first, we do like to start with a land acknowledgement by humbly acknowledging that the Charles River watershed lies on the ancestral homes of the Massachusetts, Nipmuc, and Wampanoag tribes. And we recognize and acknowledge them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. And I already mentioned who the speakers are. I also want to acknowledge that we have some terrific local and state officials who at least RSVP'd, and I haven't checked to see if they're here, but who had RSVP'd, including State Representative Stephen Owens, Watertown City Councilors, congratulations on being a city, Caroline Bays, John Gagnan, and Vincent Piccirilli, the Chief of Staff to the Massachusetts Department of Fish and Game, Bob Greco, and the Fish and Game Commissioner, Ron Amadon. So we are thrilled to have you all here. First, I'll just, if you want to move the slide, Robert, give some background on Charles River Watershed Association. We've been around since 1965, and CRWA was founded by a group of residents who did not accept the conventional wisdom at the time that the Charles River could not be cleaned up. And so CRWA has played a central role in the cleanup of the Charles ever since. We have an interdisciplinary staff, scientists, attorney, communications folks, and engineer. And we have 4 main program areas: river science, Blue Cities, which is our stormwater work, climate change adaptation or resilience, and then our advocacy work. And with that, I will turn it over to Robert.
awesome. Thank you so much, Emily. So we're just going to start off talking a little bit of the dam history. And pre-1600s, this location was used as by the indigenous people as a fish weir. Then a stone dam was created at the location. And after that, the towns of Medfield, Natick, Needham, and Newton actually petitioned the state legislature to say, hey, we're concerned about the fisheries that are and the fish that are not coming up to our towns because of these dams. So, and after that, it was transitioned into more factory use. And in the 60s, it was rebuilt as the current concrete spillway. And the fish ladder, which we'll talk more about, and Ben will talk a lot about, was constructed in 1972. And I'm going to transition over to Beth Lambert, from the Division of Ecological Restoration, the director. She's going to start presenting her presentation on dam removal in Massachusetts. Thank you, Beth. Stop sharing.
Thanks. I am just getting my slide shared. There, can you see that, Robert?
Looks great.
So hi everyone, good evening. It's wonderful to meet you tonight. My name is Beth Lambert, and I'm the director of the Massachusetts Division of Ecological Restoration. It's a long name, so we often call it just DER, and you'll hear me say DER over the next few minutes. DER is part of the Department of Fish and Game, a Massachusetts state agency. And so my co-presenter tonight, who will be speaking in a little bit, is Ben Gahagan, who's with Division of Marine Fisheries. So both of our divisions are part of the Department of Fish and Game. So the Division of Ecological Restoration is a 25-person division, and our mission is to restore and protect rivers, wetlands, and watersheds for the benefit of people and the environment. This is a recent photo of us getting together for the first time since the pandemic started, seeing each other in person last fall. The role of our division is that we partner, we work hand in hand with landowners, with municipalities, with NGOs and agencies on projects that restore rivers and wetlands across the state, and also that help people and nature adapt to climate change. And so this list here tells you the type of work that we do. Dam removal is a huge focus of our work, working with dam owners who no longer want their dams and are ready to have them removed. We work with towns to replace undersized and failing culverts with larger, safer structures that provide fish passage. We restore freshwater wetlands on retired cranberry bogs. We restore coastal salt marshes, and we work with project owners to integrate ideas such as public education and recreation into these restoration project sites so that communities often get many benefits above and beyond the immediate restoration project. So with dam removal as a major part of our work, I'm here tonight to share sort of a statewide perspective on dam removal. And so what I'm gonna talk about in the next few minutes is a little bit about how many dams we have in Massachusetts, where those dams came from, why dam owners are really becoming interested now in removing their dams. And then at the end, I'll show you some before and after pictures of a couple of dam removal sites from around the state. So to start with, I want to let you all know that there are at least 3,000 dams in Massachusetts. Each of the little blue or purple speckles on this map is a dam. The green triangles show dam removal projects that are currently in planning. And then the orange circles show places where dams have been removed since around 2000. So 3,000 dams is a lot, and there are likely more that we don't know about. Every time I take a map of a watershed with the dams on it and I go and meet with a community, the first thing that happens is that someone raises their hand and says, well, you left out this dam, or I know about this dam down behind the park. So there are a lot more smaller dams that are not in the state's database, but these are the ones that we know about. I want to summarize the ecological effects of dams for you with this diagram. So what a dam does is it essentially blocks water from moving downstream. The dams that we have in Massachusetts, the vast majority of them are called run-of-river dams. And so that type of dam blocks water behind it, so it causes water to stagnate, but it doesn't have the ability to trap the water that comes in from upstream. It's kind of like a bathtub that's always full. Like if you have a full bathtub, and you pour water into it as though that's the river coming in from upstream, that water just pours over the lip of the bathtub. And so our dams are much like that. They back water up behind them, but at the same time, the river comes from upstream, flows over the top and goes downstream. So when the dam backs up water behind it, that water stagnates. As it stagnates, it loses dissolved oxygen, and it also warms up. As it loses dissolved oxygen, the water quality declines, and it becomes very difficult for many fish to breathe in that water because the oxygen is so low. So in the water behind the dam, in the pond or impoundment, you'll often see low dissolved oxygen. You'll often see water much warmer than it would be naturally. And you'll find that native species, native fish species such as brook trout and others can't survive there. Dams also purely just block the fish unless there is a structure to provide passage over the dam. And some of the key fish that are blocked by dams, which Ben will speak to later, include river herring, American eel, sea lamprey, and shad. Another thing that dams do is they trap sediment. And that sediment, particularly in the coastal areas, could be put to much better use if it were to continue moving downstream and into the estuaries and the salt marshes, where river sediment has been key in helping salt marshes keep up with changes in sea level rise over time. And then the last thing that I want to mention is that I said earlier that the water behind dams is often warmer than it would naturally be. Well, that water spills over the top of the dam and causes thermal pollution downstream. And this is something that we've seen through data collection at a variety of dam sites around the state. So the thing to keep in mind is that each dam contributes to these problems where that dam is located. But with 3,000 dams in Massachusetts, the cumulative effect of all of these dams, the impacts on water quality, the impacts blocking fish and wildlife from being able to move upstream, trapping sediment, the cumulative effects of all the dams in the state are quite significant. And in fact, dams are one of the major stressors on aquatic ecosystems in Massachusetts. The amazing thing about dams is that when you remove the dam, you are immediately removing the impacts that that dam was causing, and you immediately restore river health. And so many river scientists say that one of the best things that you can do for a river is to remove the dams that are on it. It's one of the most important river restoration techniques that's out there. So that is one of the reasons why our division has focused so much time and energy on working with communities and others on dam removals. Not only are dams one of the major stressors, but removing a dam truly removes the stressor and allows the river to recover. So what I want to talk about now is where these 3,000 dams in Massachusetts came from. Dams in Massachusetts were initially built in the 1600s and 1700s, soon after settlement occurred. Water power from dams was used to manufacture pretty much everything that people might need. Or better way to say it was that everything manufactured that people used came from mills that were powered by falling water, which came from the dams. So whether it was lumber from a lumber mill, or flour or corn from a grist mill, these dams and the mills were integral to these early settlements in New England. And so as soon as the first settlement was formed, the first few dams were built so that the basic necessities of life could be provided by those mills. Interestingly, as Robert was referring to in his overview, no sooner were these dams built than folks upstream from the dams realized that those dams were blocking fish that they relied on. So often within a community, the first dam was followed by some of the first dam regulations or some of the first lawsuits. These are examples. This is from Massachusetts state law. So for example, in 1709, a law was put in place to prevent what they called nuisances by hedges, weirs, and other encumbrances obstructing the passage of fish in rivers. So basically saying, you know, this law, the goal of this law is to prevent people from putting barriers to fish in rivers. Well, it turned out that passing the law did not solve the problem. So in 1727, the Massachusetts legislature added a penalty so that there was teeth to enforcement. But as towns continued expanding across New England, mills became more and more important. And so in 1741, the legislature put into place a law that was explicit as they could make it. And that law was called an act made to prevent the destruction of the fish called alewives. And that act required dam owners to provide passage for river herring. What they did at that time was dams were built of materials that allowed them to be deconstructed or opened up easily. And so every spring, mill owners would open their dams and allow the river herring to migrate upstream to spawn. And then they would close or reconstruct the dam later and use it to run their manufacturing processes. So in the early days, dams were small enough and they were constructed in a sort of an impermanent way so that fish passage could be provided. That said, the legislature clearly knew that that was not working and put this law in place to try and prevent alewives or river herring from going extinct in Massachusetts rivers. Over time, however, with the Industrial Revolution, dams became more and more important to manufacturing, to local economies, and to the state economy and regional economy. And so over time, dams became something they were more permanent. They had to be in place year-round in order to provide the manufacturing function. These companies employed hundreds and hundreds of people. They are manufacturing year-round. There was no incentive economically for dam owners to take their dam down or open it up during the fish migration periods anymore. So at some point, those dams stopped being opened and there was no fish passage provided at all. So during the 1800s, those dams were, if they were built initially in the 1700s, in the 1800s, they really became integrated into the economy. Well, it turned out that dams as an economic engine were fairly short-lived. And so in the 1900s, we entered a period of dam abandonment. Manufacturing moved away, water power was no longer needed or used. It was no longer the efficient way to manufacture. And, but no one took the dams down when those companies closed or when those mills closed. Instead, the dams were left to sit in the rivers. This slide shows 4 pictures of dams that are examples of those that were left behind. And these are all dams that were removed over the last 10 years. So now, having come out of the 1900s, which was the era of dam abandonment, we're now in an era of dam removal. And we are seeing an incredible growth in interest in dam removal from dam owners. Dam owners in Massachusetts run the gamut. There are state agencies that own dams, Department of Fish and Game, where I'm based, for example. I believe we own 30 dams. Municipalities own around, I think, 1/3 to 1/2 of the dams in the state. Like I said, the state owns quite a few dams, and private owners own dams as well. Regardless of ownership, though, we are seeing more and more interest in removing dams. And so what I want to do now in the next minute or two is just describe to you why dam owners have become so interested in removing their dams. There's no doubt that it's growing. We get far more interest than we're able to support. And it's really become almost a movement in Massachusetts and really nationally. So as I said in the beginning, over 60 dams have been removed since 2000. There's a number of reasons why dam owners are growing interested, more and more interested. The first one is that with climate change, we are seeing more frequent, larger storms. Those storms are placing more stress on these aging dams. The dams were largely abandoned, and many have not received very much attention or a lot of repairs over the last 20 to 30 years. So they're deteriorating, and these storms place more and more stress on them. This slide shows several dams that breached during Tropical Storm Irene a few years. And then on the lower left, you see the Whittington Pond Dam in Taunton, which nearly breached and buckled in 2005, leading to an emergency repair situation while downtown Taunton was evacuated. The second reason that dam owners want to remove their dams is because of liability. According to Massachusetts dam safety regulations, dam owners can be held liable for any injury or damage, property damage, injury to people resulting from their dam. So that could be a dam breaching catastrophically, or it could be someone injuring themselves or dying at a dam. Dams tend to be attractive nuisances. And so the photo on the upper left shows a dam in Greenfield with, in the upper right corner, you can see a bunch of young people. And in the summer, they love to slide down that dam and swim. It turns out though, that low head dams are particularly dangerous, deceivingly dangerous, I should say, for boaters and for people who are swimming. And so the graphic at the bottom of the slide shows the unique, what this image calls a drowning zone, but it's really a circulation of water at the base of the dam, which can make it extremely difficult for someone who swims over a dam or goes over a dam in a boat to get out of the river. And this is, even though these low head dams may be small and they may look harmless, this circulatory effect can be deadly. So dam owners are aware of this. They're aware of the dam safety regulations that say that they could be held liable. And many of them want to get rid of their dams purely for the liability reason. The third reason is the cost to the dam owner. Dam owners under Massachusetts state law are required to pay for dam safety inspections. They're required to comply with the repair recommendations, which they pay for out of their own pocket. And in general, dam removal is often less expensive compared with repairing a dam to bring it up to modern safety standards, and then continuing to have it inspected and repaired, every 5 years or whatever schedule the state has set for that dam. And those costs go on in perpetuity. Dam removal, on the other hand, is a one-time cost. And then you get rid of that liability and that repair situation in perpetuity. And then finally, federal and state funding is available to help defray the cost of dam removal. So cost is really one of the most important reasons why dam owners are looking at removing their dams. Next, there have been many leaders and advocates outside of government, such as the Charles River Watershed Association, which help share information about dam removal and help make people aware of the benefits of dam removal, both for the owners and for communities. And then finally, there's a great deal of incentive funding from the state and federal government that can help defray the cost to dam owners. I particularly want to mention two federal agencies, the NOAA Restoration Center and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Both of those agencies received significant increases in their budgets in the bill that Biden just signed like a week or two ago. I've forgotten the name of it, but it contained something like $400 million specifically for dam removal for the NOAA Restoration Center to give out as grants, and a similar amount for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Those agencies tend to be very interested in coastal watersheds, such as the Charles River watershed, because they want to restore migratory fish. So this is really the time for dam owners, particularly in our coastal watersheds, to be thinking about dam removal if that is something that interests them. So to wrap up, I'm just going to show you a few photos so that you can get a sense of before and after. What I want to say as I'm starting these is that every river is unique, every dam is unique, every community is unique. So when I show you these, I'm not saying that this is what the Watertown Dam removal would look like, but it gives you some idea of what other dam removals have looked like. This is the Whittington Dam on the Mill River in Taunton. It had an impoundment of about 26 acres altogether, so a small pond of 26 acres. This is what the site looked like, same view. Let me go back. So this is basically the same viewpoint throughout the next few photos. This is about 9 months after removal. So you can see that the former impoundment has greened up. And then this is 18 months after removal. This photo was taken in the winter, and that's why it's brown. But you can see at this point, it just basically looks like a free-flowing river. And there's no remaining sign of that impoundment. This is also in Taunton. This is a dam called the State Hospital Dam. This is a better view of the impoundment right after it was drained. So you can see that initially it is quite muddy and bare, but then it recovers and goes on to look exactly like a free-flowing river, which is what it is. So rivers recover very quickly from this work. And then I think lastly, these are 2 dam removals on the Shawsheen River in Andover. There's before and after on the upper left and upper right. That's called the Marland Dam removal. And then lower left was the Balmoral Place dam removal. So in conclusion, what I want to say about the dam removal photos is that even though each site looks different, there are a number of commonalities that I can say that we've seen for sure. In all of our dam removals, the river recovers quickly. It takes on the characteristics of a free-flowing river, unique to that river system, but nonetheless a free-flowing river. Fish return right away. Water quality improves, and the site recovers in terms of the return of vegetation. So with that, I think my take home from this is just that interest in dam removal is growing dramatically. We have many, many, many successfully completed projects in Massachusetts that we can point to as examples. And if you know anyone who's interested in removing a dam, please pass them to our division. We would love to talk with them. So thank you. Thanks, Robert.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Beth. And the Division of Restoration has been a key partner in the Watertown Dam and obviously dam removals across the state. So now I'm going to pass it off to another person, Ben Gahagan, a fisheries biologist with the Division of Marine Fisheries, another state agency, to talk more about what's going on here in the Charles River and his work looking at shad and other migratory fish species in the river. Hand it off to you, Ben.
Thanks, Robert. All right, now I get to play the same game as Beth and see if I can figure out which screen I want to share and do everything correctly. So hopefully this all works. And I'm gonna go to this. All right, everybody should be seeing just my presentation.
Looks great, Ben.
Thanks, Beth. All right, so this is a view from inside of the top of the fish ladder at the Watertown Dam, which I always love this picture. It just seems like it's cool and it's fitting for what's going on with the dam and the river in its own way. So I'm going to speak to you, and thank you for having me tonight, about diadromous fish in the Charles River. As Beth and Robert said, I'm a diadromous fish biology, and a diadromous fish is any type of fish that needs to go between fresh and salt water to complete its life cycle. That's the definition of one. So it has to do that. There are some fish that go in between fresh and salt water over the course of the year just to take advantage of food and that doesn't actually make them diadromous. There's another term for that. But if they have to do it to complete their life cycle, that makes them diadromous. And in the Charles River, we're speaking about most of the diadromous species we'd actually find in Massachusetts. So on the upper left here, this is the part I wish we were in person. I'd just start quizzing people and asking people to raise hands when they knew what a fish was, but it doesn't work as well virtually. We have an American shad here on the upper left. It's smaller cousin of river herring. And then getting down in size, we have rainbow smelt, white perch, sea lamprey, tomcod, which are a small diadromous gadded, American eel, striped bass, and then sturgeons, both Atlantic and short-nosed sturgeons. And in the Charles River, we have spawning populations of really everything except the sturgeon and striped bass. These are more seasonal visitors to the river, while the other ones are here year-round. The American eel has a distinction in this group of being what's called catadromous, and that's actually like the reverse of all the other species. Every other species here is anadromous, which is like the salmon life model, where a fish comes in and spawns in fresh water, the babies grow up, and then go out to the sea and eventually come back again as adults to spawn. An eel does it in reverse, where they come into fresh water as a very small eel, translucent typically. They gain their pigment, they live in fresh water for 6 to 20 years, and then go out into the marine ecosystem to spawn. So that's the opposite life cycle. Very cool fish. So where have we been and where we are? So this is a bad news, good news situation. I'm going to start with the bad news, get that out of the way first. So this is a really illustrative figure from a paper about a decade ago now, but what you see here are the different species, many of the different species I was just mentioning, Atlantic sturgeon, American shad, river herrings, blueback and alewife, American eel and rainbow smelt, and striped bass. And basically, we're talking about relative abundance, like the most fish we have any record of and the least fish, and going between 1,800 to 2,000. This is a mishmash of harvest records and other types of ways of estimating abundance mixed up with how we can count them now. But what you can see is that for basically everything except striped bass, by 1950, 1975, we had just far, far less than we've ever had before. And that's where we are now. We're pretty much at these little remnant populations as far as the abundance of these fish in our ecosystems when you compare it to most of the history of this continent, and even the first century and a half or 2 centuries of Europeans being here. Even striped bass, which had been kind of the management success story in all of this, have been in, since this paper was published, in a bit of a downswing, and we're doing a lot of things now to try and make sure they don't go back down to what you see, that big dip here in the late 70s and 80s. So we're trying to prevent that from happening again. The good news is, and this is going to be weird good news at first, it used to be worse, at least locally in the Charles River. So this is an excerpt from a very well-cited book that came out in the 1920s by one of our early Department of Fish and Game commissioners named David Belding, who did a full survey of coastal Massachusetts river herring. And you can see here, he's talking about the Charles River. And I'll highlight the important thing to take away here. Its decline has been due indirectly to the influence of cities along its banks, the various changes made in the lower portion of its course, pollution from manufacturing concerns, and obstruction by dams. The possibility of restoring this fishery is remote. So in 1920, they were saying, basically, this is one of the first rivers to lose all of its anadromous fish in the Commonwealth, and we don't ever see it coming back. And that's not the case now. I think for anybody who goes down to the dam, if any of you have gone down to the dam in the spring, you see all the river herring there. You hear about shad and eels and all these other things I just told you about. So that's the good news. At least locally, we have more fish in the river than we used to have. And that's from a lot of efforts by a lot of people, including CRWA and a lot of my predecessors at Fish and Game. So we'll move to an overview. We'll talk about dams, since we're here really to talk about the Watertown Dam. And the purple dots you can see on this map are dams, and I've labeled the ones on the Charles. And currently, there are fish ladders, or at least fish passage systems at the first 5 dams on the Charles River. So you can see New Boston Dam, the locks downtown, and there is a fish ladder there, but now they just simply use the locks. They open up the locks every hour to allow fish to move through. The Watertown Dam, which we're here speaking about tonight, the Moody Street Dam in Waltham, and then Lower and Upper Newton Falls each have fishways. I think Bob will probably talk a little bit more about those. So what you can see here is exactly what David Belding was talking about, is that with a series of dams, fish that used to go all the way up into Natick are no longer making it there. So since about 2005, the Department of Fish and Game, primarily the Division of Marine Fisheries where I work, alongside the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who, as Beth Lambert mentioned, are very interested in restoring anadromous fish like shads and herrings, have been working very hard to bring American shad back to the Charles River, along with other species. And I'm going to focus on shad for a little while now, the next couple of slides, because we've done a lot of work around them with the help of CRWA. And we did a lot of different things. You can see on the upper left here, we set up a video counter at the top of the Watertown Dam fishway. So we had some understanding of how many fish were using that and what species were able to use it. This is a video still. And so this larger fish here is an American shad. And then, like I said, you can see its smaller cousin below that, this is an alewife. And these lines are about 6 inches apart. So you're talking about a 20-inch fish and a 12-inch fish side by side there as they swim through. This picture is all this water coming out of this pipe is filled with millions of shad, baby shad, little, inch-long shad that were grown in a hatchery, and we're putting into the river up above Moody Street to try and reboot that population. These fish typically come back to the river that they imprint on as juveniles. So the idea is that you can put these little tiny fish in the river, just like a salmon, they're going to imprint on the river and then come back as spawning adults. And finally down here, this is the fun part of the job. We're actually putting a little bit of electricity in the water to stun fish so we can catch them. And then we get to see what's actually in the river and whether or not all this effort to put baby fish in the river and work on passage and other things is working, and if we're getting adult shad and river herring back in. And I will say that what we found doing the video work was that we did this for 2 years. There's a lot of video. I basically hired somebody to watch video for more or less 4 months straight. But between 300,000 and 450,000 river herring were making it through the Watertown Dam every year, but only about 40 shad both years. And they were mostly smaller size shad. So the indication was that probably the females, which are typically larger, weren't making it into the top of the fishway, only the smaller males. And then the reason for that is that this fishway, unfortunately, it's built, the state owned the land on one side, and the other side was privately held. So they put the fishway on the state side, and that is not where the deeper channel where the shad are swimming up to the dam is. It's on the other side of the river. So they have to get over the front of the dam, which if anybody's been down there, it's very shallow and rocky, and the fish don't like to go over that. The shad don't. So the next step in trying to understand what was going on here was looking at the impacts. And this study that we did, I want to talk to you a little bit about the study we did, just so you can clearly see what these dams do. I figured this is a good way to talk to you about, like, what do really dams do? Because Beth and I can talk to you and show you conceptual diagrams. So really, this is where the rubber meets the road, and I can show you some real data we collected to try and bring this shad fishery back so people had an opportunity to catch these fish. They're a lot of fun to catch on light tackle. They jump, they fight hard. It's a great fish. And that's the primary reason, outside of them also being a good forage fish and bringing food into the ecosystem, fresh and salt water. We wanted to bring American shad back also as a recreational opportunity. So we focused on the river from the New Boston Dam, where the locks are, up to the Watertown Dam. So that's just that lower stretch of river. And so here, what you can see is we tagged fish in two years. On the top, you have 2015, on the bottom, 2016. And these bar graphs, we put these acoustic tags in the fish. So we caught the fish, and I implanted small transmitters about that big into the fish. They ping a unique noise for each fish. And then these dots that you can see in the map are where we put receivers that listen for those tags. So we knew when fish were around in different parts of the river over the course of the year. Every time a fish swam by the receiver would say, I heard this fish at this time on this day. So we knew exactly when and where fish were when they'd be near a receiver. And we were able to say, okay, fish were heard a lot in the upper part of the river, this red area by the Watertown Dam, much less so in the middle section of the river through Cambridge. And then again, very often right by the locks. And so basically what we found out, and we suspected as much, that fish were having a lot of trouble at the Watertown Dam and not getting over it. That's where we'd encounter fish the most when we're electric fishing. But we also found that the Charles River locks were creating a lot of issues for fish trying to get out of the river afterwards. And this is a nice kind of cartoon I put together that hopefully illustrates that a little clearer. And you can see the date gaining here. So as we're sampling fish, you're seeing more and more dots. And the blue triangles are males and the yellow and the pink dots are females. And so you can see as we get into early June, most of the fish are up by the Watertown Dam, which is this red bar on the left. And then they swim very quickly down through here, and they're just massed up by the locks. And very slowly, they then are able to figure their way to get out to salt water and migrate back to the ocean. But you don't see a lot of fish congregating in the middle. You just see them cycling through and at either end. And you don't see any fish making it above the dam, importantly. So then even here in late July, when the river is far too warm, these are basically now 5 or 6 fish that died right in front of the locks. They weren't even able to find their way out. They just died and they sat there. And that's why they're saying that there's fish in front of the locks. So I think that's hopefully a nice way that illustrates how these dams affect the fish. They kind of just takes a big free-flowing river and turns it into 2 roadblocks for them. And it's doing that for a bunch of fish. It's not just doing that for shad. River herring, as I said, hundreds of thousands of river herring are making it through Watertown Dam, but we certainly see that it's mostly alewife, not blueback herring. Blueback herring could be making it further up. And it seems to have its effect as far less fish actually make it to the next dam in Moody Street. And so really this ladder passes river herring. It doesn't pass shad very well. It doesn't pass any of those other species I showed you. So it's really just, as Beth mentioned, fish passage works, but on a really limited scale. So we want something where if you remove the dam, we're going to have all these fish just going through that area quickly and making it further upriver where they want to be. And that's going to reduce the delay on the fish. And this is really important because especially in a system like this where there's dam after dam after dam after dam, when a fish comes into the river, it's basically trying to come in as fat and as full of energy as it can because the amount they eat is vastly reduced. They're really just there to make babies. And then hopefully they survive that experience and go back out to the ocean and come back in a year or two and try and make babies again and again and again. And that's how you have these really big populations that even if they have a bad year, stay stable in size. And so when you have a dam and a fish wastes a week trying to get up past that dam, find a fishway, it's burning energy that it should be using to spawn or get even further up into the river where it wants to be spawning. So it's very important for them to get through quickly. So Watertown Dam, even though it's only the first dam there, is really important because it's the first step in getting delay down and getting fish further into the watershed where they want to be. So it's also going to increase the amount of habitat, both spawning and nursery. So both places where these fish can spawn as adults and then where the babies will have good habitat to grow before they go out to the ocean. And it's going to improve the habitat. As Beth said and showed in her diagram, temperature, dissolved oxygen, and all these other really important factors for aquatic life are impaired in behind dams. It's like a big warm bathtub behind those things. And when you take them out, you get free flowing water that's cooler and has higher oxygen. It's just better habitat for aquatic life. And this paper is hot off the press. I'm sorry, I'm hitting you guys with some science data and figures and things like that. But I was really excited about this figure when I like literally, this is in pre-press. I just saw this last week. And so on the vertical axis here is what you're just looking at, a measure of biomass. So how many fish are there? Just measured in metric tons per cubic kilometer of water. but just think about how many fish are there. That's really all that is. And this is a big modeling effort to look at over time what it could look like. And the orange and black lines are if you theoretically reduced fishing pressure on river herring and shad. And the orange line, I think, is if you reduced, if you eliminated fisheries that frequently and caught them as bycatch, because nobody's trying to catch these things anymore. They just catch them trying to catch herring and mackerel and other things. And that didn't really have any effect. The black line is if you got rid of all commercial fishing totally. A little bump in the amount of biomass. This blue line is if you did the reduction in bycatch and you also opened up a bunch of habitat. So what this figure is saying is we can do all we want in the ocean with bycatch, and it's going to have a really minimal effect. But if we do projects like the Watertown Dam and the other dams that can be removed in our rivers and further upriver in this river, this is what we have to do to get to a place where, again, we have a lot of river herring and shad. We have people fishing for them, people able to use them for food if they want. And these things also feed tunas, striped bass, cod, largemouth bass, pike, all these osprey, otters, seagulls, herons, all these beautiful parts of our river that we love to see and why we love to spend time there. So they're like the little potato chips running around these rivers. And if we want more of them, and if we want more of everything that eats them and needs them, we need to give them more habitat to make babies in, and we need to be able to let them get in and out. Like I said, these are diadromous fish. They need to get in and out. And if we make it hard for them, we're gonna have less of them. So we need to do things like the Watertown Dam removal if we wanna have a lot more fish. And I think that I had a question slide, and hopefully I kept that fairly short for y'all and somewhat entertaining. And the Q&A though, I think, Robert, we're gonna do at the very end, correct?
Yes.
All right.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben, for that awesome presentation and overview on the fisheries aspect. It's so many cool things in perspectives on this project and on fisheries in general in the Commonwealth. So I'm going to share my screen again. 1 second, folks. Everybody see my screen? Awesome. Well, building off what Ben mentioned and Beth mentioned in their presentations, there's a lot of history and great amount of history and fisheries in the Charles River going back to home rule petitions from Natick in 1795 to help regulate herring and shad fishery. And this scanned copy of the law from 1795 is right on the right from the state archives that I've provided. Additionally, Atlantic salmon and other species, which is no longer in the Charles River, unfortunately, and really on the East Coast has really been decimated. But historically, they would go all the way up to Wrentham, and the Wrentham Historical Commission has some documents surrounding that, which is kind of really fascinating. You can also find a lot of historical records in Watertown's herring warden records at the library. And when we talk about this project, we cannot forget that fish historically and today spawn in the tributaries, including beaver and Chester Brooks and Waltham, which are upstream of the Watertown Dam by Newton Street. And at CRWA, we'd love to see fish passage back up into those tributaries in historic spawning grounds like Hardy Pond. And just some history kind of piggyback off what Ben was saying. CRWA was involved and helped partner with DMF on the stocking project for the shad, getting the babies back in the river, as well as partnered on some monitoring for the fisheries. In addition, it's not in the slide, but we also helped, this is way before my time at CRWA, but we helped do a partial breach at the Bleachery Dam, which is upstream of Watertown Dam on both sides. So it's improved passage there. And in 2016, CRWA reached out to Beth and folks at DER to apply for a priority project for Watertown Dam, which was accepted, which allowed the state to do the feasibility study, which I'm going to get into now. And just before I get into the study, I just want to take some time to build off and acknowledge build off the land acknowledgement that Emily said earlier. in the presentation and talk about how CRWA has been learning about how dam removal relates to Indigenous peoples. And firstly, Native Americans from the Massachusetts Nation had fish weirs at the site of Watertown Dam, so-called head of tide or high tide mark historically. And additionally, Indigenous people from Natick, we learned recently, petitioned the state legislature to stop construction of Watertown Dam in 1735 because of the impacts on fish populations. And additionally, these fish were really a critical food and nutrient source for the Indigenous people in the area. And these dams are really a result in a legacy of colonization that favors the agricultural colonial settlers over the Indigenous people. So it's just a very, and this is a paper which we can share with you all surrounding that history. And transition topics, for many people, a major concern of dams and Watertown Dam especially is flooding. And the Watertown Dam is currently operating as a run-of-river dam, as Beth has mentioned, meaning it's not holding back any water for flood control purposes. And this dam has been not known to operate as flood control purposes, as you can see from this photo from 2010's flood, where the water went above and around the dam, as you can see in the following photos. Some more photos, you can see the water way over the banks in that major flood and over the benches in the park next to the dam. And for feasibility study timeline, in 2018, Malone and McBroom, which is now SLR, was hired to do the feasibility study, including conducting hydrologic and sediment assessments to determine the feasibility of removing the Watertown Dam. And the feasibility study was wrapped up this past summer in June. It found that the dam removal was feasible. And we have the full technical report on our website, and the link is here, crwa.org. We will share that with you also after the meeting. And a major concern of Watertown Dam is dam failure. And DCR's Office of Dam Safety, the Commonwealth's dam regulators, classify Watertown Dam as a significant hazard potential structure in fair condition. This means that if the dam was to fail or break uncontrollably, there'll be a potential for loss of life, significant property damage, and large-scale economic disruption. And according to the evacuation plan that was in the feasibility study, a dam failure could impact the office complex on the north bank, downriver of the dam, the Gagnan Street Bridge, portions of Charles River Road, the Charles River Greenway, and the Watertown River Park, the Braille Trail, as well as recreational complexes close to the riverbank downstream of the dam, including places in Newton and Brighton. And according to the hydrologic modeling from the feasibility study, dam removal could lower flooded elevations approximately 6 feet at the dam itself, and the floodplain would be reducted, and the improvements would be reduced and slowly diminish up to a half a mile upriver of the dam's current site. And after a half a mile upstream, there would be no flood changes. Additionally, there are no anticipated changes for flooding downriver of the dam because it is one of the run-of-river dams. Additionally, there were concerns in the report about trees falling on the spillway, as well as on the earthen part of the dam, causing erosion and potential for failure. And as a result of inspections, which are in the report, also DCR has done some tree removal on parts of the earthen parts of the dam. And that will continuously have to be done if the dam is to remain in place, as well as upgrades to the dam would have to be continuous. And when we're evaluating whether to remove the dam, people may ask, why not build another fish ladder on the side by Sasaki? And really, it's not really the best option, as Beth and Ben have mentioned, but because the fish ladders, they don't improve water quality, they don't allow sediment transport downstream, as well as they don't restore passage in groups of all sorts of aquatic organisms. And with the legacy of industry in the Charles River, it came with no surprise that during testing of the feasibility study, they did find some contaminated sediments behind the dam. However, proper engineering practices, including placing armored rocks and vegetation, will prevent major erosion with post-dam removal river flows. And if the state goes forward with a dam removal, they would have a formal sediment management plan with a public process for public input and permitting and design. And it could be, the feasibility study said up to 1,700 cubic yards of sediment will likely need to be removed offsite for disposal in the area blue around the dam. And additional sediment pockets upstream may have to be removed as well after further testing in the sediment management plan. And having these contaminated sediments removed from a dynamic river system like the Charles River in anticipation of climate change, stronger storms, and more rainfall is another positive benefit of this project, because you're going to remove any risk of any dam failure or release of sediments from a storm. And now I'm going to transition to show some renderings from dam removal. This is the current view of the dam from the California Street side of the river, if you all are familiar. This is the fish ladder that Ben was talking about. And here's an updated rendering CRWA did with SLR to look at what it would look like after removing the dam. See the water level move down a little bit. You can see more rocks and riffles where the dam structure was, because this was the head of tide where the tides would have ended historically. And you would still be able to hear water moving and hear rocks and riffles and see, you know, sort of moving water, sort of like the spillway. It's obviously not the same as the spillway, but it is a different sort of beauty. See before and after. And then here's a current view, or it's a couple years ago because the bridge is not here. When they were constructing the pedestrian bridge, but this was from the feasibility report. This is a view, aerial view. Not many people are going to be up in a helicopter or drone, but this is the view of the dam from above. And then this is what it would look like after removing the dam. The water would be lower, and you could see the riffles and going over the rocks and such. And this is with a higher flow. But this is sort of one of the views that you can see. And you may be wondering, like, what's it look like for other locations? I know Beth has shown some images to show other dam removal sites. And SLR, the consultant who did the renderings as well as did the feasibility study, provided some of these photos of other examples of dam removals where they've done renderings from a project in Connecticut. And the SLR uses their engineering practices, all of the study that they've done for the hydrology, the sediments, and looking at where the ground level is with ground penetrating radar and the such, to create renderings like that and base it off of that. So this is a photo of the impoundment area in the Black Ledge Dam in Glastonbury, Connecticut. This is before the dam was removed. This is obviously a different type of river system. It's a lot wider, a lot smaller, and a bit more of a pond setting than the Charles. So it's going to be different looking. This is what the rendering SLR provided for that dam removal. So you can see a lot smaller river than the Charles. And this is what it actually came out to look like after the removal. You can see here's a person, here's the river, and the greenery has come back and it's got smaller. So this is just to show that they've done renderings. It comes out, looks pretty similar to what was predicted from the engineering and the renderings. So I know it's 8:02, so we're gonna transition to question and answering. My colleague Dira is going to, I'm gonna look to see if anybody has a question. You can raise your hand, or if you would like, you can also put it in the chat box, which is on the bottom of your screen. And the raised hand function is under reactions. I'm just looking through, I don't see anybody yet. Okay, first question is from Susan Falkoff. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Susan asks, what are reasons to not take it down? It's a good question.
Well, Robert, I think that,
Ben?
yeah, I mean, you really be maintaining the status quo, right?
Yep.
I think that there are most people would say that might be opposing taking it down, would say that there would be some type of cost associated with taking it down. There might be some type of disturbance to what is there currently and the way things are allocated and what resources are there, what wildlife is there. And that might shift, to a minor degree, or even in some cases to a major degree. But it's going to be, as Beth pointed out, financially speaking, and I think this is something a lot of people miss, because a lot of us, like myself, get really jazzed up about the ecological benefits. But financially speaking, Beth made the great point that, and this is a state-owned dam, this is owned by DCR. At the end, the taxpayers have to pay for this dam. We're all taxpayers. The federal government right now is gonna really provide a lot of financial assistance to remove these dams. But in the short run, there may be less to just do your dam inspections and do your dam maintenance than remove it. In the long run, that's not going to be true. And yeah, there's going to be a difference. You're still going to have the noise of running water. You're going to have flowing water, all like a lot of the aesthetic things that people like, but it will look slightly different. Some people are really attached to dams. And if you really like having a pond, there's not going to be impounded there anymore. There's going to be impoundments. I mean, below is kind of an impoundment because they manage the water height. And so once you get down to the boathouse at community rowing, you're still going to have an impoundment there. Even before that, really, probably at the yacht club. But that little impoundment will be lost. So, I mean, those would be reasons you might not want to remove it. But I think that there's going to be, in my opinion at least, there's still a lot of aesthetic value. You're still going to have ducks and geese there. You're going to have all those birds there. You're going to have a lot of what's there already. And just, but I mean, there's arguments to be made for not doing it. Obviously, these are value choices that everybody gets to have their opinion on.
And I'll just jump in. If the questioner was wondering sort of, is there a reason it hasn't been removed? I think, we know from the feasibility study and from all the arguments that are made here tonight, there are a lot of arguments in favor and not a lot, and certainly it's feasible to do. I think we tend to think it's more just related to inertia. As Beth pointed out, I mean, this is just one of many dams that was no longer in use, and just no one wanted to take the time and the energy and spend the money to remove it. As anyone who's worked in a bureaucracy knows, that there's always plenty to do. And if no one's really hassling you to do something, well, maybe you're just not going to do it. So now we are trying to provide that pressure to show DCR that this is a dam that it's worth spending the time and the money to remove.
Yeah. And if there's no more questions, I'll even tie all that together with a little bit of a bow, Emily, where I was really, I've been working, this is about 3 years ago, and I've been working on this site for at that point, about 8 years. And I was at a friend's wedding, and it turned out his mom had grown up just down the street on the Watertown side from the dam. And when she was a kid, it was before it became a concrete dam. And each spring, the wooden part of the dam would blow out, and it would be a river in the spring again, and all the fish could swim by and everything was fine. And all the kids would go, they'd always get in trouble with their parents, because their parents would be like, do not go rafting on the river. You could die, you could drown. And then they'd go rafting and they'd end up like, downtown Cambridge, and like, crud. How are we getting back without our parents figuring out what we did? And that was like the thing. So, I mean, it is crazy that you talk about inertia and people's idea of what this looks like. This isn't even a site that goes back to like Henry, I'm working on a dam in Billerica where it goes back to Henry David Thoreau, but this isn't even one of those. This is something where it's been like, this has been a concrete dam for 60 years. That's a really short amount of time in the scheme of dams in New England. I think Beth probably would have better stats on that than I would, but certainly a lot of the dams I go and do fish ladders at. It's one of the newer ones.
That's an amazing story.
Cool.
Robert, before you go, jump to the next person. I saw that Barbara Moran from WGBH had a question. sorry, from WBUR, bad mistake. How much will it cost to remove the dam? And shouldn't the state prioritize dams that are more dangerous? Well, I think we did see some evidence that this dam is considered somewhat dangerous, but Beth, I don't know if you want to respond to that about the expected cost of a dam removal like this.
I actually don't have the cost in front of me. Robert might have it more accessible than I do. If not, we can look it up and send it back out. Do you have that data, Robert?
Yeah, hold on one second. I had it right up. I think I don't want to speculate, but I'll pull it up. But it was in the feasibility report, and it was also noted that because construction costs are changing with the pandemic and supply chain, that it would be likely to change. So I'm going to check on that, but I'm going to go to the next question because we have.
Well, we'll just say that obviously the infrastructure bill was just passed. We have ARPA money that the legislature just approved. So we do know that we have a lot of money available for water infrastructure in general, and that includes dam removal. So now is a great time to be making plans to spend money on dam removal.
Mm-hmm. One thing I would say about priority is that there are different reasons to remove different dams. And so yes, the state also provides funding for dams that are highly dangerous, that are, in unsafe condition, for example, and high hazard. And so there's a grant program that is specifically dedicated towards that type of dam specifically, particularly municipally owned dams. And then there are other programs that also prioritize the climate resilience and the environmental benefits of dams. And so the Watertown Dam falls into that type of category. We heard some of the safety issues from Robert. But also removing this dam is particularly environmentally significant. And then it's also potentially significant because the Charles River is such an icon for Massachusetts. It's like the river that belongs to everyone. It's in everyone's heart, and it's just part of the Massachusetts landscape. And so, as an example, whatever the Charles River does is viewed as feasible and possible, and really sets the stage and the tone for the rest of the state. And so one could argue that this particular dam, because it's on the Charles River, removing it would have widespread impacts from an education, from a stakeholder engagement, in all kinds of intangible ways that go above and beyond the immediate environmental benefits. So I say that, really in the end, it's up to the dam owner to decide what to do with their dam, because they're the ones that bear the liability, and they're the ones that are responsible for the cost. So it really comes down to what the dam owner wants for their dam.
Thank you, Beth. I found the cost. It's right now from the feasibility study, it was $1.8 million, but also with a 20% contingency, which would be a total of $2,160,000 was the estimate from June.
Thank you.
Next question we have is from Mary Kay Kenny. We're just going by the order that they've come in. I know more are coming in. Next question is, can you talk about failed projects? What issues may come up? And I don't know. What I would say is sometimes dam removal projects take a lot longer because there's some engineering challenges, but eventually they could be solved, or sometimes there has to be a longer process with community input. Obviously, that would come in the design phase, but I would say that on top of my head, I don't know of a failed project. I don't know if Beth, you have anything other to say.
There's one that was done. It was the first one done in Massachusetts. This is a technical issue that was not appropriately paid attention to. And the construction company did not remove the full vertical extent of the dam. They basically left like the base of the dam flush with the bed of the river. So they cut the dam down until they reached the stream bed. The dam actually went below the surface of the stream bed. And when you do that, what happens is the stream beds are always moving. So the stream bed moved away from the dam, and they were left a couple of years later with the piece of dam sitting there, which then became a dam again, essentially. And so the dam was removed, but then 2 years later, that little remnant was excavated by the river and was sitting there blocking fish and causing problems all over again. So that was probably back in, I don't know, 2005 or something. And everyone learned a big lesson from that, which is to get rid of all of the concrete, no matter whether it's buried in the stream bed or not. And that's really the biggest, the only project that I would consider failed. As Robert says, they've all had technical challenges, but there's been no failure. You know, once you have a free-flowing river, once the concrete is out of the river, the stones are out of the river, it's like you have a natural environment that no longer requires human intervention and maintenance on a regular basis. So it's kind of self-sustaining.
Thank you, Beth. Next question is from Ernesta. What needs to be done to help get this project to move forward? I can take a stab at that. We're really looking at, so as we've said, this dam is owned by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's owned by DCR, which is a state agency. So it really is it's like the people's dam. So I think that we're going to be doing some organizing. When I say we, I mean CRWA, to look at getting public input for to DCR about people's feelings on removing the dam. So I think that's really where it's got to come down to, is putting more pressure on DCR and getting everybody's voices heard on this project. Emily, do you have anything else to say?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, going to the point I was making earlier about sort of just bureaucratic inertia being a big obstacle, to the extent that we can demonstrate that there is strong support at the local level from regular residents, from local officials, from the state legislators, that will go a long way to, I mean, this is a dam that the state owns, and we have a state agency, as we've been hearing from, who's very eager to remove dams. So having that strong support saying, you know, as long as we're taking steps to improve our water infrastructure and spend money on water related infrastructure, let's get some ecological benefit here and remove this dam that has been, you know, not serving any purpose for hundreds of years. I want to make sure we go to Ralph Levy next, because I see that Ralph's been holding his hand up. Ralph, can you, I did see you in case you thought I didn't see you. Can you unmute?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, I have two questions. One is the river is, whoops, I just disappeared. Are you there?
No, we hear you, we hear you.
Okay,
Hear you.
my screen just went blank. Looks like it's coming back now. The river just below the dam, where it widens, has been shallowing rapidly over the last decade and a half anyway. Will the change in flow have any effect on either reducing the sediment or adding more sediment? That's my first question. Have I disappeared?
No,
we can hear you.
Okay, that's
Do you want to
we're fighting
my
over
first-
who will handle it.
that's my first question. Let me ask my second question, and then you can answer both of them. Haven't we, by removing this dam, haven't we just moved the fish problem a couple miles upriver to the Moody Street Dam?
So who wants to handle the sediment question first, or the sort of depth question?
So I can take a stab at that, and people can chime in too if they have other thoughts. For flow, I think it would not be a change in flow, because it's not being held back, kind of like what Beth was saying. The Watertown Dam is kind of like a bathtub or a bowl, and you add water to it, it's just going to keep overflowing it. So by removing it, and they're not going to remove it all at once and have a big tidal wave. It'd be slow draw down of the dam, and then it would just be a normal flow of the river. So that would be my understanding is that it wouldn't change the flow level below the dam because it'd be the same flow coming over the dam today.
Yeah. My concern is that the dam is building up sediment behind it, which is being held. Obviously, that huge amount of sediment that has to be removed would have flowed down river. And the river flows pretty rapidly after that dam. But then when it hits the very wide portion just across from the Newton Yacht Club, that flow slows down and all of the sediment drops into that section between the Newton Yacht Club and the Rowing Club. And what I'm concerned about is without that dam collecting sediment, will that sediment then flow down and settle in that same area?
Beth, you may have seen this, but I think there was a article on low-head dams that came out maybe a year ago showing that most, I mean, Mr. Levy, I can't speak to this dam in particular, but it did show that most low-head dams get scoured out every 5 to 10 years fairly well by high flow events from really big storms. So it does build up sediment behind it, but basically that top layer is constantly getting scoured out. And you're right, though, it is getting deposited exactly where you're saying it is. And so I don't know if I'm just not sure that the dam being there or not is going to affect that part of it. That's naturally where that river is going to, dam or no dam, is going to slow down again. And that sediment, I would expect it to be deposited there. That helps.
Well, it only helps to reassure me that it's not going to get considerably worse. It doesn't answer the sediment problem there now, which can only be resolved by dredging.
I've heard from other boaters, Ralph, about that. So maybe that's something we can talk about offline. I wonder if Ben wanted to respond to the question of like, what's the big deal? This only buys us a couple miles until they get to the next dam.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, not specific to this dam, but like any system, I probably didn't make this point clearly enough in my talk, that when there's been a lot of research with shad and river herring and other diadromous fish, is that one dam, if you have fish passage there, I mean, on the first place, fish passage is really working for one species here when we have like 4 or 5 species of diadromous fish we'd like to be getting through, let alone all the resident fish that are blocked by it. So it really helps all the aquatic life if you get rid of the dam, where even if it is just a Moody Street, it makes a big difference for all that aquatic life that you're improving things for, not just one thing. But even when you get to river herring and a few shad, when you have dam after dam after dam and they keep on getting more and more delayed and spending more and more of their energy to get over a series of dams, is when you can have some very serious impacts on your fish populations. So even though when you have rivers that have 3, 4, 5 dams on them, and you say, okay, well, we still have these other 3 or 4 dams. If you remove one, it's still a benefit, because those fish are going to be, more fish are going to get to that next dam, and they're going to have more energy to get over that dam and successive dams to get further in. So it is a benefit when you have any situation with multiple dams on a river to remove any of them. It will improve your fishery.
All right, but the spawning, I'm sure, if it occurs, is taking place after the Moody Street Dam, in the lakes area. So
there are some, both of these species like shallow water, on a little bit on the slower side. The main species I focus on, the river herring and shad. So the fringes of the river will work. And again, I think the main improvement will be removing one source of you'll have some increase in habitat. You'll have better habitat because it'll be cooler and lower temperature, which is what these fish want. And then you're going to give them kind of a running start at Moody Street, where before they were already being stopped and held up and having to spend a lot of energy just to get to Moody Street. Now they're going to be unobstructed all the way to Moody Street. So that will make a difference.
Good. I have no objection to this.
Actually, Ralph, we're going to move on to someone else because we only have till 8:30.
Oh, the other thing I want to mention, though, is that there is tributaries like Beaver and Chester Brooks below Moody Street where the fish have been seen to go up. And the smelt spawning habitat is really being lowered by climate change, and because they can't get past Watertown Dam as sea level rise, their habitats really, and spawning habitats, really going to be reduced fast. So
yeah, sorry, Robert, that's great. I forgot to say that, and I meant it earlier. This is one project where smelt could, there's very few projects where smelt could benefit. This is one where they really could. So, and that's a fish that's really disappearing from our water. So it'd be great to have a restored smelt spawning river here. All right, sorry, move on, Emily, my bad.
Yeah, it looks like Sharon Roberts, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, thank you. I was wondering if any of these dams with some modification are viable to join the clean power movement and become sources of hydroelectric energy.
Do you want me to speak to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think I know the answer, but why don't you?
Okay, so my answer is going to be general about dams in Massachusetts, and then maybe if Emily or Robert has something specific to say about these, then they can chime in. So in general, most of the dams, most of the old mill dams in Massachusetts don't have either enough volume of flow or enough of a drop to create sort of an economically feasible amount of power. And so statewide, often when we get dam owners coming to us, it's because they've looked into hydropower first, and they've discovered that the cost of rebuilding the dam up to modern safety standards and then retrofitting it for hydropower is quite high, and the power generated due to the very low amount of drop is quite low. And so for that reason, many dam owners choose not to pursue hydropower. I can't speak to the dams on the Charles because I don't have experience with those, but I do want to offer that statewide perspective. And that's why we don't see more of the smaller dams pursuing hydropower. We do see it on some of those, we do have hydropower dams in Massachusetts, and we see those dams, trying to upgrade their operations to produce more power. But it's these smaller dams with the lower drop where we're just not seeing the interest.
I can't improve upon that. We certainly favor more clean energy, but we think it makes more sense to be pursuing that with solar and offshore wind and the other things that the state is doing a great job pursuing.
Great. I'm going to move on. We have a lot of questions in the chat, so I want to get to as many as we can, and maybe we'll go over a little bit if we're amenable to that. So who benefits now from the dam being there? I don't really see anybody really benefiting from the dam being there from CRWA's perspective, other than if people really have a view that they like the look of the spillway. Maybe those people would have strong feelings about keeping the dam there. The next question is from Catherine. What other dams on the Charles are being considered? What of the Natick Dam? So the Natick Dam is owned by the town of Natick, and they are currently going through a public process to look at either removing the dam or doing a retrofit, which would remove a lot of trees on the earthen part of the dam. So that is a dam that CRWA would like to see removed. This is actually the first dam that's not owned by DCR on the Charles River. All the ones below South Natick are DCR-owned dams. So this would really be a big step forward in dam removal for the Commonwealth if DCR looks to remove this dam. It's sort of set a precedent for a lot of the DCR dams.
But Robert, do you want to mention Rentham also?
Oh, yes. Yep, that's true. There is a dam owned by the town of Rentham on Eagle Brook, which was where the Atlantic salmon used to be able to go to. That is a tributary way up in the upper watershed. And that one, the town is looking to remove it, but they're going to go through a public process similar to Natick, but they've been kind of delayed because of the pandemic and funding. So the lightning round. Who decides whether to move the dam? What steps need to be taken? I think we answered that question. John, it's DCR. They would have the ultimate decision. Okay. We answered Ralph's question about the shallowing live. Answered Barbara's cost question. Charlo asked, will the pedestrian bridge still be usable? That's a good question. The pedestrian bridge will be usable, and that was evaluated in part of the feasibility study. There may have to be some sort of engineering ways to make sure it's going to be stable and not be scoured out by reducing the water level, but I'm not an engineer, so I don't want to speak too much on that, but they will have to look at making sure that that bridge, as well as other bridges, are not going to be impacted by the dam removal. If they would be impacted, that would be resolved in the engineering for the dam removal. Also, there was in the report, it talked about stormwater outfalls that would have to be retrofitted to make sure there's not erosion on the adjacent parcels. Nick asked, how much narrower will the river be? It would be reduced a little bit, as you can see in the rendering. I don't have the exact numbers, but the water level would go down a little bit. But the benefit of that is now you have more park space and more riparian buffer for the river. Question, Robin, what's happening to the historic stonework found at many dams after removal? That's a good question. I have seen, and maybe Beth will can talk a little bit more about this, but I've seen at places like in Town Brook and Plymouth, which I think Beth mentioned or Ben mentioned, that they've kept a part of the wall or moved the wall into an adjacent park if it's a historic structure, or if the community wants to keep a piece of it. There are ways to incorporate things on the land part of the river, or out of the river, out of the water, to keep that historic. But I think Watertown's not really historic, but if people want to keep something, that could be a part of the conversation in design. I don't know if Beth, you have anything else to add?
Yeah, communities often use the dam removal as an opportunity to provide community education about the dam and its purpose, or dams that have maybe been there previously. And so they might reserve portions of the dam, for use as benches, or to develop a little interpretive spot with signage. Some communities have used the stone to create like a miniature kind of amphitheater where people could sit and listen to an interpretive program. So there's all kinds of ways to use stone if it can be reused.
And also that as part of the process, a lot of times they have to do a historic marker as part of the Section 106 permitting. Mike asked, would the dam removal require any dredging or sediment removal in the basin downriver? I don't think so. That was not a part of the feasibility report, but that's a good question. I think anything downstream of the dam would not be really in the scope of the project, but like I mentioned in the presentation, there would be 1,400, I believe, cubic feet removed directly behind the dam because it's contaminated. So that would be a dredging, but not in that area that Ralph was talking about. Miki asks, can you talk about the steps involved to make a dam removal a reality? Petition, votes, what can we do? That's a great question. Emily, do you want to?
Yeah, why don't we'll be following up with you. Some ideas there would be a petition, would be, say, a letter from your town councilors, letters from elected officials. I mean, really everything that can be done to demonstrate strong support locally to DCR would go, and to EEA, frankly. That's the Mass Energy and Environment Agency that oversees all environmental work for the state. Those kinds of things would go a long way, and we'll definitely be following up with everyone who registered on next steps on that. Great.
I'm going to keep going, Emily, because this is so.
All right. Yeah, it's 8:32, so it won't hurt our feelings if anyone wants to drop off. Yep. But if we're able to answer everyone's questions tonight, we would like to.
Yeah, I really like to answer people's questions because I've been in meetings where they don't, but we'll try to get through them. 2 questions. Would the river be navigable above the dam area by canoe and kayak? So yes, it currently is, and it will be better navigable after the dam removal because you wouldn't have that drowning zone that Beth mentioned. Next question, is there any possibility for electricity harvesting microturbines? Obviously we said no, so that's been answered. Strongly support this. Okay, that's a comment. Thank you. Can fish spawn between here and Moody Street, or does that dam need to go too? I think we answered that question. They can spawn between there. Moody Street does have a ladder. I think down the road, improvements to that or looking at that would be something to look at, but that sort of Watertown sort of the first in the equation. Usually you work from downstream to upstream, unless there's an opportunity like South Natick where strategically you could potentially remove that one. Is the dam owned exclusively by the city? No, the dam is owned by DCR. We answered that, which is the state. Kane, the area below the river has already been impacted by significant sedimentation. Won't dam removal exacerbate sedimentation downstream since the new Boston Dam will still have an impoundment? I think we answered that question. How soon could it be removed? I think first we have to have a decision on that. Typically it takes a few years. Beth, would you say 4, 5 years, 4 to 5? My guess was correct. Once you have a decision, because there's a lot of permitting, public process, public input. All right. What needs to be done? Okay, we answered that question. One of the slides shows fish stuck downstream of Watertown Dam and another cluster stuck upstream of Boston Harbor Dam. Will removing the Watertown Dam make any difference to the fish stuck at dying downstream dam? We're removing Watertown Dam. So I think the question is surrounding the locks. Ben,
yeah, and that was probably me trying to go too quickly through that slide. So what was happening there is that fish, after they couldn't get past Watertown Dam, what we found was tag shad, they try and get out of the river. And at this point, they're at their most energetically depleted level. The water's getting hot, which is very hard for them. And they were unable to find the locks to get out. And so it was kind of like another roadblock on the way out, which is not something we were expecting, but it also kind of accentuates how dams in general and whether it's a locks that they're getting through or a ladder or whatever, cause these delays. And in this case, it was leading to mortality. These fish knew they wanted to get back to the ocean after spawning, because this is what they do. They spawn multiple times over their lives. And they were kind of at their most stressed out point of the year. Think about if you have kids, it's right after Christmas, you're about to lose your mind. And so these fish weren't able to make it out. I have a 7 and 4-year-old. Sorry, that's all I can think about right now. But so that was more the point of that, is that so again, getting back to this idea, any system with a bunch of blockages, the more you can do to reduce that stress on the fish, decrease delays, the better it's going to be for the fish and the better fishery you're going to have.
So we have one more question from Barbara Moran from WBUR. She asked, was there anybody opposed to dam removal? And we had a site walk, and some people did express concerns and about especially the views, and some concerns about wildlife, which I think we addressed in the site walk that we had a couple months ago. But there were some people who were concerned about it. And I think that is all the questions. Any final questions from anybody? Going once, you can raise your hand, which is in the, so you can see reactions. Anybody? Looking around. Anybody in the chat? Going twice.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you so much to our speakers for joining us tonight, and to all of you, such a great, attentive audience. We will be back in touch on next steps. Thanks, folks.
Bye-bye.